The teacher leaned in, smirking as he said, "You don't belong in conversations you can't hear." The class laughed. Aaliyah didn't. Deaf, black and burning inside, she clenched her sketchbook, like it was the last piece of herself they hadn't stolen. That moment should have ended her. Instead, it lit the match that exposed everything they tried to bury. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The classroom buzzed with a familiar midday energy. Chairs scraping, pencils tapping, students murmuring in half-whispered alliances. Yet none of that noise reached Aaliyah Johnson in the way it reached everyone else. Sound for her was a distant vibration, a softened echo, a world filtered through devices that struggled to keep pace with the chaos around her. She sat in the back row, posture straight, eyes trained sharply on the teacher's mouth, so she wouldn't miss a word. Her hands rested neatly on her notebook, where pages of meticulously written notes captured every equation, every phrase, every detail her hearing aids sometimes failed to catch. She had learned at a young age to be present twice as hard as anyone else, once with her eyes, once with her mind. But even that vigilance couldn't shield her from the sting of invisibility. When Mr. Graves scribbled a question on the board, a basic geometry conversion, one she had solved many times in her sleep, Aaliyah lifted her hand, not abruptly, not desperate, just a steady raise, the quiet confidence of someone who understood not only the question but the deeper hunger behind it. Her lips moved gently, silent words forming. "I know this one." She waited. No one noticed. Her hand remained suspended in a world that rarely turned toward her unless it needed an example of accommodation. Then a few students snickered, the kind of laughter that carried a blade without needing volume. Mr. Graves finally glanced her way, and instead of acknowledgement, he let out a breathy laugh, the kind coated in sarcasm rather than humor. "Aaliyah, let's give someone else a chance today," he said, but his tone had a sharper undercurrent, the type that didn't rule with logic, but with dismissal wrapped in a smile. He didn't look at her directly, he looked past her, as though she wasn't truly someone with an answer but a reminder of an inconvenience. A few students followed his cue, smirking toward her desk with an energy that made her chest constrict. It wasn't the ignorance that wounded her. She had lived long enough with that. It was the intention behind it, the refusal to treat her brilliance as anything but noise. Aaliyah lowered her hand slowly, pressing it against the notebook until her fingertips whitened. She traced the equation lightly, grounding herself in the certainty that she did know it. Her hearing aids hummed faintly, the steady, low static she had grown used to. Yet the real silence came from the inside. It wasn't the absence of sound, it was the absence of acknowledgement. A silence that tightened her throat and made her feel as though every breath was an intrusion. When the bell rang, it startled half the class, but not her. The vibration hit her before the sound ever could. Students rushed out in tight clusters, leaving a faint scent of chalk dust and adolescent chatter in their wake. Mr. Graves didn't look her way again. He gathered his papers briskly, oblivious or indifferent to the weight of what had happened. Aaliyah didn't move. Her shoulders lifted with a quiet breath, and she stared at the whiteboard with an intensity that made the numbers blur at the edge. Something within her felt heavy, like a locked door she wasn't ready to open. Not anger exactly, not sadness entirely, but a vow forming in the quiet recess between them. She stood only when the hallway noise thinned, as if waiting for the world to empty so she wouldn't have to weave through the fragments of embarrassment still lingering in the air. The room seemed larger now, the silence thicker, not oppressive, but reflective, as though every empty seat held a mirror to her experience. She packed her bag methodically, sliding her notebooks into the worn backpack whose seams had begun to split from constant use. Her fingers brushed against a pocket where she kept her emergency batteries for her hearing aids, a reminder of how she always had to prepare more than anyone else, even to be ignored. She zipped her bag slowly, but then paused as two girls walked into the doorway, unaware she was still inside. They were mid-conversation, whispering with urgency rather than gossip. "I'm telling you," one said, rummaging through her phone, "if we do it today, he won't be able to deny it anymore." The other leaned closer, voice dropping lower. "But what if he catches us? We can't let him see the file." "Not yet." Aaliyah straightened, heart thudding at a rhythm she could feel even if she couldn't hear its full beat. The girls weren't speaking about her, but their tone, sharp, secretive, sliced cleanly through the fog of her earlier humiliation. The first girl tucked her hair behind her ear and whispered, "We're doing it after last period. We need proof. Real proof." Her words were laced with determination, not fear. That was what struck Aaliyah. Students at Jefferson High didn't normally talk about proof, unless something dangerous, unfair, or deeply hidden lay beneath the surface. Aaliyah had never been included in these kinds of conversations before. She was often seen as too fragile, too quiet, too different. Yet here she was, on the edge of someone else's secret, and she felt a strange flutter, curiosity mixed with something almost electric. The second girl's gaze flickered toward the room, and Aaliyah quickly grabbed her backpack and ducked slightly, pretending to tighten a strap. But it was too late. The girl's eyes caught hers in a fleeting moment of recognition before she drifted back to her friend. "Let's go," she murmured. "We'll meet in the east hallway. Bring the flash drive." Flash drive. Proof. Denying something. Aaliyah's mind raced, trying to stitch the fragments into a picture that made sense. The girls disappeared down the hallway, and she remained standing in the middle of the room, pulse slowly stabilizing yet tinged with a new tension. She felt the universe shift slightly, not enough to see but enough to sense. Something was unfolding behind the scenes of her humiliation, something she wasn't meant to witness. But she had, and now she couldn't unhear it, even through the muffled filter of her devices. As she stepped toward the doorway, sliding her straps onto her shoulders, she replayed the words in her mind. Not just the teacher's mockery, but the whispered urgency of classmates plotting something that could unravel more than classroom jokes. For the first time that day, she felt something push against the weight inside her. Not relief, not acceptance, but possibility. Then, just as she stepped out into the hallway, a realization stopped her mid-stride. Those girls hadn't said the name of the person they wanted proof against, but she had a sinking feeling she already knew. As she moved toward the lockers, the whispered conversation replaying in her head, another voice echoed faintly from down the hall. A boy murmuring, "We have one shot. If she finds out, everything changes." And before she could even turn, the door behind her clicked shut on its own. The walk home felt heavier than Aaliyah expected, as though the hallway whispers she overheard clung to her clothes and followed her across every cracked sidewalk. Her backpack strap rubbed against her shoulder, and for the first time all day she wished silence could wrap around her gently, instead of suffocating her. The earlier humiliation from Miss Graves still pulsed inside her chest, but layered beneath it was the strange discovery of those whispered plans, the girls talking about proof, the urgency in their voices, the secrecy in their glances. It stayed with her all the way to her front door, like a shadow shifting just behind her, always out of sight, but close enough to unsettle her. When she stepped inside the apartment, the warm smell of cornbread caught her, and she saw her mother, Mariah Johnson, standing at the counter, apron loose around her waist. The soft overhead light cast a glow across the small kitchen, making it feel safer than the world she'd just left. Mariah turned, expecting the usual half-smile her daughter gave after school, but instead she froze. Beneath the fluorescent hum, Aaliyah's cheeks glistened faintly, with dried tears, the kind she always tried to wipe away before reaching home. Mariah's heart tightened instantly. She crossed the room without a word, placing a gentle hand under Aaliyah's chin and lifting her face to the light. "Aaliyah, what happened?" she whispered, careful not to overwhelm her daughter with too much movement, keeping her words slow and visible so Aaliyah could read her lips. But Aaliyah didn't explain. She didn't describe the teacher's laugh, the sting of being dismissed, the pitying glances from classmates, or the whispered conspiracy she stumbled into. Instead, she simply reached up, touched the small device hooked behind her ear, the hearing aid she relied on, and the same thing others used to define her, and said quietly, "They laughed." Mariah's breath trembled as she pulled her daughter into her arms. There was no need for explanation. She understood the cruelty of children, the sharper cruelty of adults, who taught them judgment without ever teaching compassion. She held Aaliyah until the girl's shoulders relaxed, then guided her to the table, brushing stray hair from her forehead. They ate together in calm silence, the kind that came not from Aaliyah's deafness, but from the mutual understanding that words weren't always necessary to measure pain. After dinner, Mariah tried to coax more out of her, a name, a moment, a detail, but Aaliyah only shook her head. It wasn't refusal, it was exhaustion. Later, when the apartment lights dimmed and evening settled over the neighborhood, Mariah found herself standing outside Aaliyah's bedroom door, listening to the soft rustle of paper as her daughter sketched in her notebook. It was how she processed the world, through visual story, through strokes of pencil rather than spoken sentences. Mariah whispered a prayer into the hallway air, a plea for strength, for clarity, for justice she did not yet know how to pursue. She left the door cracked open so Aaliyah could see the glow from the living room, a small signal that she was not alone, even if she needed solitude. The next morning began with the illusion of normalcy. The cool air, the faint smell of coffee, the hurried breakfast. But the moment Aaliyah stepped into the school hallway, she sensed the shift. Something had spread faster than truth. Mockery. A pair of boys whispered while glancing toward her. A girl near her locker stifled a laugh behind her hand. Down the corridor, two students nudged each other as Aaliyah passed, one tilting his head mockingly as though imitating her hearing aid. The cruelty was practiced, something they crafted in mere hours overnight, proving how quickly shame could travel, especially when fueled by adults. A cluster of phones lifted subtly as she walked by, their lenses angled toward her like tiny unblinking eyes. She didn't know whether they were capturing her silence, her pain, or simply trying to provoke a reaction. Something they could spin into entertainment. She kept her head down, lengthening her strides, wishing for a shield she could wear. Her hearing aids picked up the faintest vibrations of their whispers, not exact words, just the rhythm of ridicule. Yet each vibration felt like a jab, a reminder of the line Mr. Graves had drawn the day before. When she entered his classroom, the discomfort deepened. Mr. Graves stood at his desk flipping through attendance sheets. He didn't greet her. Instead, as students trickled in, he repeated, almost proudly, a distorted version of yesterday's event. Some students need to understand their limitations, he remarked, voice loud enough for Aaliyah to catch the tone even if she missed the full sentence. Not everyone is built for academic rigor. Several students smirked knowingly, their gazes sliding toward her like sharpened arrows. It wasn't just an insult, it was a public announcement. Aaliyah slipped into her seat, spine straight, fingers tight around her pencil. She felt herself shrinking, not physically but inwardly, into the corners of her own mind where she could process without collapsing. It wasn't the shrinking of defeat, though Mr. Graves hoped for that. It was a shrinking of concentration, a gathering of strength. She began focusing not on the laughter, not on the whispers, but on the memory of those girls in the hallway yesterday. Their words had been urgent, not cruel. Their secret had and somehow, instinctively, she knew it was connected to her. During lunch, she sat alone at a small outdoor table near the courtyard. The sunlight warmed her face, grounding her, but even here she couldn't escape the stares. A group of students nearby replayed something on a cell phone screen, laughing louder each time. She braced herself, expecting to see a clip of her walking silently, or Mr. Graves belittling her. But then she realized, they weren't watching her. They were watching a recording of him, a shaky video someone must have taken through the door yesterday. Him leaning in, mocking her ambitions, dismissing her participation in class. It was grainy, imperfect, but unmistakable. Aaliyah's breath caught as she leaned slightly closer. They weren't laughing at her. They were shocked by him. Conversations scattered across the courtyard. Some students outraged, others refusing to believe what they saw. A few still dismissed it as edited. But the important part was this. The narrative was no longer solely centered around mocking her. It was shifting subtly, powerfully. Momentum was forming beyond her control. Yet humiliation still lingered. Because kids weren't monolithic. For every student who looked at her with newfound sympathy, another passed by whispering something cruel just to reclaim their sense of dominance. It was messy, uneven, confusing. The early stages of a story that had not yet decided who it belonged to. When the final bell rang, and she made her way home, she carried a strange duality inside her chest. She had felt smaller than ever today. But she had also seen the first crack in the wall built against her. Something was beginning to shift beneath the surface, something she couldn't fully name yet. That night, after homework and a quiet dinner, Aaliyah sat on her bed scrolling through her school-issued tablet. She didn't post much online, but she checked messages sometimes, mostly out of habit. Tonight the feed moved slowly, classmates posting memes, pictures, and bits of gossip. She was about to set the tablet aside when a new notification appeared. Not from a friend, not from a classmate, from an unknown user. The message had only 6 words, but they struck her with the force of a revelation. Are you ready to show them what they missed? Her heart pounded. She didn't recognize the profile. No name, no photo, nothing. But the timing? Too perfect, too intentional, too connected to the whispers she heard yesterday. Someone out there knew something, and they were reaching for her. Before she could reply, a second message popped up, this time containing a single attachment labeled, "Before they erase it." The morning light filtered through the dusty windows of Jefferson High, landing in soft rectangles on the hallway floor. For Aaliyah Johnson, walking through that corridor felt different now. Not lighter but sharper, as though every tile echo carried the memory of yesterday's sneers, and every locker whisper threatened to bleed into her thoughts. Still, she held her head higher than before. The previous day's humiliation had carved a wound, but the message on her tablet, "Are you ready to show them what they missed?" had ignited something inside. Not defiance, but determination. Today she would respond not with anger, but with clarity. She made her way into art class carrying a sketchpad and charcoal pencils, the same supplies she always used to translate what she couldn't hear into what she could design. Today she didn't sketch landscapes or abstract swirls. Instead, she filled the page with geometric lines, symbols she had memorized during math homework, equations disguised as ornate motifs, poetry written in sign language notation, alongside floating algebraic expressions. To any casual observer, it might look like graffiti, with purpose, a swirl of curves and shading and fragments of words. But to anyone who had eyes to read between lines, it was brilliance, quiet but unmistakable. Around her, other students chatted, painted, molded clay. The teacher moved slowly between tables, nodding at projects without pausing long enough to notice details. Aaliyah worked without sound, not flinching when hip-hop music thumped softly in the background, or when classmates leaned in to whisper about lunch plans or weekend games. She felt only the pencil in her hand, the soft whir of her hearing aid, filling her ears, and a constant white hum, a world filtered, yes, but also focused. Every stroke on paper was a reclaiming of space. This was her voice, her logic, her rhythm. Several seats away, Jasmine, a pale girl with skeptical eyes, usually quick with jokes and louder laughs, glanced over during a lull. Her gaze fell on Aaliyah's pad. At first it lingered on the swirl of pencil shading, the overlapping arcs of what looked like artistic design. Then it shifted, subtle, almost invisible, to the tidy notation tucked in a corner, an integral sign, a half-erased limit, a small inequality. Her brow furrowed, her lips parted for a fraction of a moment, as though she tried to shape the sound of her shock, but instead swallowed it. The laughter she might have given yesterday died in her throat. For once she didn't see Aaliyah as different. She saw potential. She saw a mind drawing silently in a room built for noise. Time stretched. The teacher called the class to clean up. Brushes dropped. Chairs scraped. Erasers rattled. Aaliyah closed her sketchpad slowly, carefully hiding the work beneath the outer cover. When she stood, she felt Jasmine's eyes on her back. Not gossiping, not mocking, but curious. A subtle shift, but enough. Enough to make the air between them change direction, from hostility to consideration. On her way out, Jasmine brushed past the desk quietly, holding something flat, a small slip of paper. She tucked it beneath Aaliyah's sketchbook without meeting her eyes, as though performing a secret act that only she and whoever might find it would understand. Aaliyah got on the bus home, surrounded by noise, music loud, chatter high, backpack straps squeaking against seats. Yet inside she felt a strange calm. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers grazing the sketchpad's cover. She remembered the weight in Jasmine's eyes, the hesitation, the shift. It felt like permission, not from everyone, but from someone. Acknowledgement without sound, validation without applause. At home, the kitchen smelled like baked cornbread again, but now the warmth felt sharper, not comforting, but alive with possibility. Her mother asked how school had been, her voice gentle, careful enough for Aaliyah to read. Aaliyah answered with a simple tilt of her head and a soft smile, wordless but honest. She retrieved her sketchpad and flipped to last page. She didn't draw that night. Instead, she held the pad open on the table and touched the paper gently, as though trying to absorb something from it. The graphite lines felt cooler under her fingers. She closed her eyes and pressed her palm against the page. Her hearing aids hummed, familiar, constant, but tonight she listened not for sound, but for the pulse of her own resolve. Later, tucked into bed, she opened the school-issued tablet she used for messages. She scrolled quickly, bracing for the usual flood. Memes mocking her, rumors, phone videos from classmates. There was none of that, at least not today. Instead, she noticed a new unread message. The sender anonymous. Her heart dropped, then lifted a bit. The screen blinked. You deserve more than whispers. No name, no explanation, just that. A simple phrase, but enough to shatter the prison of doubt that had built around her mind. Her chest tightened. A rush of questions flooded in. Who sent it? A friend? A stranger? Someone who had seen the sketch? Someone who believed in what she was silently showing? She closed the tablet with trembling fingers, staring into the darkness of her ceiling. In that silence, the hush born of night and hope, she felt something stir deeper than fear. Because for the first time, the silence around her didn't feel like protection. It felt like a canvas waiting to be filled. And she wasn't going to whisper anymore. When she reaches under her bed to retrieve a small flashlight, just in case, the room's door clicks quietly behind her. She freezes, heart pounding, and the tablet screen flashes again, a new message. No text, just a single photo. It's her sketch pad, the page she hid, the equations and poetry visible under dim light, and at the bottom, in neat handwritten script, "Show them." The next morning dawned with the kind of stillness that made everything feel sharper, as if the world itself was waiting for Aaliyah Johnson to make her next move. She woke earlier than usual, not because she was eager for school, but because the anonymous message from the night before clung to her thoughts like ink that wouldn't wash away. The image of her sketch, the very page she had hidden, stared back at her memory with haunting insistence. Someone had seen her work. Someone had access to it. Someone wanted her to show them. The mystery didn't frighten her as much as it should have. It energized her, nervous and electric, reminding her she was being watched, but for the first time maybe watched for her potential, not her shortcomings. At school the hallways carried a different tone. Students still stared, but the looks weren't uniform anymore. Some were curious, some confused. A few seemed unsettled, whispering among themselves. They had seen the video snippets of Miss Graves belittling her. It had rippled through the school like a quiet tremor shaking loose the false foundation of his authority. Yet none of that eased the tightness in her stomach when she stepped into his first period classroom. She felt his gaze before she saw him. His stiff posture, his iron shirt, the polished shoes that clicked too loudly on linoleum floors. Everything about him was calculated to command control. As she took her seat, his eyes locked onto her with a coldness that wasn't anger alone. It was fear disguised as superiority. He had heard the whispers. He had seen the shifting attitudes. And he didn't like being challenged by someone he considered beneath notice. Class moved slowly. Every instruction was tinged with tension. Every question carefully directed toward students he knew wouldn't threaten his authority. Aaliyah kept her head down, scribbling notes, her hearing aids buzzing softly. She could feel the pressure building in the room, like a storm cloud forming overhead. Near the end of the lesson, as students prepared to pack their bags, Mr. Graves's voice cut through the air. "Aaliyah, stay for a moment." Her breath hitched. The room collectively paused. A few students exchanged glances, some worried, some entertained by the promise of drama. Jasmine, sitting 2 rows ahead, turned slightly in her seat, her brows knitting together. Aaliyah swallowed and nodded quietly. She waited as the class emptied, the hum of chatter fading into the hallway. The door swung shut behind the last student, sealing her inside with the man who had drawn the line days earlier. Mr. Graves stood at the front of the room, leaning against his desk with arms crossed. His posture wasn't relaxed. It was rehearsed superiority. "Aaliyah," he began, enunciating each syllable so clearly it felt like condescension. "We need to talk." She didn't speak aloud. She rarely did in tense moments. Instead, she raised her chin slightly, a signal that she was paying attention, reading his lips meticulously. "There's been a lot of chatter about you lately," he continued, his tone threaded with annoyance. "Videos, rumors, exaggerations. You know how students can be." His eyes hardened. "But I think it's time we address something directly." He reached into his drawer and pulled out her sketchbook, the same one she had tucked away the day before. Her heartbeat quickened. How did he get it? When? Her eyes widened, and he smirked, mistaking her shock for guilt. "You left this behind," he said, though she knew she hadn't. He opened the book slowly, like revealing evidence. The pages turned with too much care, as though he wanted her to watch each one. Math disguised as art filled the pages, her quiet talent, exposed under the harsh classroom lights. "You've been ambitious," he said. The word soured on his tongue. "Sketching things that don't belong in your level of coursework. Equations outside your depth. Poetry in a language most of your classmates can't even read." He tapped the page condescendingly. "It creates confusion, gives the wrong impression." She frowned, signing cautiously. Wrong impression of what? He didn't bother to understand her hands. Instead, he lifted the sketchbook and then pointed deliberately to her hearing aids. "This isn't for you, Aaliyah. These classes, These conversations, he tapped the equations again, levels of engagement. You don't belong in spaces where you can't fully participate. Her breath shuddered. She tried forming words, but her voice caught. Instead, she mouthed, "But I understand." He cut her off sharply. Understanding isn't the issue. Belonging is. The finality in his voice cracked something inside her. Not the shame she felt before. Something harsher, colder, a realization of just how deeply he believed the limits he placed on her. She stood frozen, staring at him, absorbing each blow without sound, but not without impact. He slid the sketchbook toward her across the desk, as though pushing away a burden he didn't want associated with his class. "I want you to focus on what's appropriate for you," he said, lowering his voice. "There's no need to create expectations you can't meet." Slowly, painfully, she reached for her sketchbook. Her fingers trembled as they touched the edge. His gaze locked onto her, stern and unyielding, as if daring her to protest, daring her to rise above the ceiling he had decided for her. She clutched the book to her chest, feeling its weight differently now, not as a creative outlet, but as evidence of the brilliance he feared. As she turned to leave, the quiet tension in the room shifted. For the first time, he seemed unsure. His jaw tightened. Perhaps he sensed something slipping out of his control. His warning wasn't protective, it was territorial. She walked toward the door, each step heavy but deliberate. She reached for the handle, then a sudden faint burst of light flickered behind her, reflecting off the whiteboard. Her body tensed. She turned slowly. On a desk against the back wall, partially hidden behind a stack of folders, a phone lay flat, its camera still glowing faintly, screen pointed directly at them. Someone had left it recording, not accidentally, not carelessly. Her eyes locked onto the lens, and for a brief second, she wasn't the one shrinking under surveillance. Mr. Graves froze, following her gaze. His face turned pale, then dark with sudden comprehension. His voice dropped, cracking for the first time. "Don't," he snapped, stepping forward as if he could erase what had already been captured. But it was too late. Aaliyah grasped the door handle and pulled it open. The phone screen flickered again, then went black. As she stepped into the hallway, heart racing, a hand slipped a folded piece of paper into her palm before she could see who it belonged to. Inside were 4 words written with urgency. "He can't stop this." Aaliyah walked down the hallway gripping the folded note in her palm, her heartbeat still stumbling from the encounter with Mr. Graves. His voice, his warning, his dismissal, it all swirled inside her, but not with the crushing weight he intended. Something else rose alongside it, a quiet burn, like a flame hidden under layers of ash finally catching air. The phone on the back desk, the glowing screen, the faint flash she saw, the way his composure cracked for the first time, replayed in her mind with startling clarity. Someone had recorded that moment. Someone had captured what he tried so hard to conceal, and whoever left that note knew exactly what they were doing. She kept walking, not daring to look back, not daring to turn the note over yet. She tucked it into her pocket just as the bell rang, releasing a torrent of students into the hallway. But even in the rush, she felt eyes on her. Different than before. Not mockery, not pity, something sharper, something curious. She didn't know why, until she reached the stairs and saw a crowd forming around a group of students huddled over their phones. Their whispers were urgent, charged and fragmented. As she approached, she caught one phrase on a girl's lips, slow enough to read, heavy enough to anchor itself in her chest. "That's her." Her stomach tightened. She moved closer, weaving through the cluster of bodies, until she saw the screen one boy held out. The video was grainy, filmed at an angle from behind the classroom door. But even with the distortion, the moment was unmistakable. The clip showed Miss Graves, leaning toward her, his voice rising, the dismissiveness sharp in his tone, the condescension dripping from every word he spoke. And there she was, Aaliyah, still, silent, absorbing the attack with a strength the camera couldn't articulate. The subtitles someone added read, "This isn't for you." Her throat closed. A wave of murmurs spread through the hallway. Some students looked confused, others outraged, and a few still wore masks of discomfort, caught between their loyalty to the teacher they admired and the truth flashing across their screens. Aaliyah felt the world around her tightening and expanding at the same time. The humiliation of yesterday wasn't isolated anymore. It had become public, undeniable, seen. Her ears filled with the faint hum of her hearing aids, as the hallway erupted into controlled chaos. Phones lit up. Notifications pinged. Screens refreshed. She caught glimpses of comments. Some supportive, others cruel. All of them loud in ways she could never be.
Can't believe he said that.
She's deaf, not dumb. She's always been weird. He crossed a line. She shouldn't even be in that class. He should be fired. The world had split into two camps in seconds. Those who finally saw her, and those who only saw an opportunity to judge. And she was standing in the middle of it. By lunchtime, the video had spread far beyond her school. Parents gathered outside the main office demanding answers, their voices rising in indignation. Teachers whispered in the corners of hallways, nervously glancing toward the administrative wing. And by early afternoon, local reporters began circling the campus, parking vans by the curb as if waiting for a storm to break. Aaliyah ate her lunch slowly in the courtyard, each bite heavy. Students hovered nearby, pretending not to stare. Jasmine approached briefly, her expression conflicted, genuine concern in her eyes. She sat across from Aaliyah, signing softly. "Are you okay?" Her hands moved carefully, respectfully, the first time anyone besides family bothered to sign to her at school. Aaliyah offered a small nod. Jasmine hesitated, then whispered, "People need to see this. They need to know." Aaliyah's eyes softened, not because she trusted Jasmine fully, but because someone finally treated her as someone who deserved to be spoken to, not spoken about. That subtle shift felt monumental, but with visibility came distortion. By the end of the school day, news outlets had clipped the video further. Headlines spread like wildfire. Deaf black student humiliated by teacher. Classroom bias caught on camera. School under fire after ableist comment. The story twisted into angles she wasn't prepared for. Some truthful, some exaggerated. All of them consuming her name, without permission. Her mother called the school immediately, furious and protective, demanding to know why a teacher would speak to her daughter that way. The administration deflected, claimed they were investigating. Meanwhile, the principal released a short public statement. "We are aware of concerns regarding conduct in one of our classrooms. We are committed to ensuring all students feel respected. Please remain patient during our internal review." It meant nothing. The vagueness felt like an attempt to control the narrative without acknowledging the harm at all. Aaliyah read the statement on her phone, jaw tightening. It didn't mention her name. It didn't mention the discrimination. It didn't mention the truth she lived every day. Her mother sat beside her at home, that evening, reading the comments online with a mix of rage and heartbreak. "Baby, I am so sorry," Mariah whispered, brushing a hand against Aaliyah's cheek. "You didn't deserve any of this. None of it." Aaliyah shook her head slowly. She didn't feel sorry for herself. She felt something heavier, a strange burden of responsibility. People were looking now. People were listening. In their own flawed ways, the silence she'd lived inside for so long had cracked. Late that night, when the house was quiet and the buzz of online noise finally softened, Aaliyah opened her email to check the school portal. She expected new assignments, maybe a generic apology from a teacher. Instead, she found a new message in her inbox. Anonymous. Subject: not the first.
Message: you're not the first.
They did this to me too. And others. You need to see the truth before they bury it. Attached to the email was a folder labeled simply, "Records they hid." Aaliyah's breath caught in her throat. Her hands trembled as she hovered over the download button. Every instinct told her this was dangerous, that opening it would unravel something she could never put back. But the same instinct reminded her she wasn't alone in this anymore. She clicked. The folder began to load. Just before the files fully opened, her screen flickered. Then a second anonymous email arrived. "Whatever you do, don't trust the principal." The files finished downloading slowly, as though the truth embedded inside them resisted being unearthed too quickly. The spinning icon on the screen cast a faint glow across Aaliyah's face in the darkened room, highlighting the anxiety etched into her features. Her hearing aids hummed with the quiet electric buzz of silence around her. But inside her chest, her heartbeat drummed with a tension far louder than any sound the world could offer. The anonymous warning still lingered on the screen above the download bar. "Whatever you do, don't trust the principal." The words weren't just a caution. They felt like a prelude. When the folder finally opened, she clicked on the first file hesitantly. A scanned document materialized. An evaluation form dated almost 20 years earlier. The name of the student had been redacted, but the category headings weren't: behavioral disruption, failure to participate, lack of academic readiness. Yet reading through the teacher comments, it was obvious the child had been trying, eager even to participate. The notes described a student who used hand signs to communicate, who turned in assignments creatively, who asked questions through drawings and written notes. And the teacher's final remark sank into Aaliyah's chest like ice. Student demonstrates potential beyond typical placement. However, due to hearing impairment and cultural factors, advanced tracks are not recommended. Cultural factors. The phrase curled like smoke through her mind. Bitter and unmistakably racist. She clicked through more files, each one more disturbing than the last. Complaints from parents of black or brown deaf students were quietly dismissed or marked unsubstantiated. Requests for academic accommodations were listed as excessive. Letters advocating for gifted placement were stamped denied due to eligibility structure. Each document carried the same pattern: a student with promise, a teacher seeing potential, an administrator shutting a door without explanation. And woven through these denials was a chilling consistency. Every name that hadn't been fully redacted suggested one thing: these students looked like her, shared her skin, shared her silence, shared her dream. Her breathing quickened. She whispered words under her breath even though she knew no one was listening. How many? How many did they do this to? Her voice trembled, barely a whisper, yet the room felt full of the ghost she was unearthing. Students who had once sat in the same building, walked the same halls, held the same aspirations until someone decided their silence made them unworthy. She opened another document, labeled Incident Report Disruptive Patterns. Inside was a list of repeated suspensions for a deaf Latino boy, whose offense each time seemed tied to misbehavior due to inaudible responses. Beneath each line, a note reiterated the same phrase: student does not follow verbal instructions. Aaliyah stared at it, her hands shaking, feeling a sharp crack in her chest. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was targeted erasure. Her mother walked into the doorway quietly, drawn by the glow of the computer. "Aaliyah?" Mariah murmured, stepping slowly so her daughter could see her lips. "It's late, sweetheart. You should sleep." But Aaliyah shook her head with urgency. She turned the monitor toward her mother. Mariah squinted, leaning closer. As she scrolled through page after page, her expression sharpened. Shock first, then anger, then fear. Not for herself, but for her daughter. "My God," Mariah whispered. "These are children. They buried these records." Aaliyah pointed to a particular line in one report. "All of them," she mouthed. Same story. Her mother exhaled, sitting beside her. They didn't want anyone to know. They didn't want history to trace back to them. She squeezed Aaliyah's hand tightly. "This is bigger than graves. Bigger than one classroom. This is the whole system deciding who gets to rise." Aaliyah nodded, tears gathering in her eyes, not from sadness alone, but from rage, from validation, from the overwhelming realization that she had inherited a fight older than she was. It wasn't just her being pushed aside, it had been generations. Students like her had been silenced before, repeatedly, methodically, until their stories dissolved into administrative dust. She clicked a folder titled Administrative Correspondence. Inside were scanned emails, grainy but legible. Some were between teachers expressing concern about biased grading, about placement decisions that didn't align with student performance. Others were communications between administrators, dismissing those concerns, instructing staff to follow protocol and preserve district reputation. One email, dated 15 years earlier, caught her attention. The subject read, "Tracking Adjustments, High-Risk Students." Inside, the principal at the time wrote, "We cannot push students who will struggle to uphold the school's standardized metrics. Redirect those with communication limitations to alternative paths. It avoids complications later." The term communication limitations felt like a blade pressed against her throat. Aaliyah clicked through more pages, each one compounding her horror. She felt her pulse rise with each revelation. These weren't isolated mistakes. They were deliberate patterns disguised as policy, a system shaped to keep certain students out of advanced spaces, to deny them opportunities, to label silence as inadequacy. Then she opened a file that made her freeze completely. It was a scanned letter, addressed to Board Liaison, confidential, typed neatly, dated 12 years ago, signed by someone whose name had been redacted. The letter read, "If this information circulates beyond our office, you understand the implications. Reputations would be destroyed. Families would demand restitution. We must ensure that the placement decisions for these students remain unchallenged. These cases must not resurface. Silence is critical. Silence. They had weaponized the very thing she lived inside, not as accommodation, but as containment. Her mother gasped softly, hand pressed against her chest. This is a cover-up, she whispered. They threatened people. They silenced teachers. They erased students. Aaliyah stared at the document, long after her mother stood to pace the room. Her throat tightened. Her hearing aids buzzed faintly, but she barely noticed. The weight of the letter pressed down on her chest like a truth too heavy to hold. She felt a tremor in her fingers as she reached for the next page. Attached beneath the letter was a partial list, names of students categorized under non-advancement recommendations. Most names were blacked out, but a few remained. Her breath stopped when she reached one of them. Elena Torres, hearing disability, high math proficiency, 7th grade. Recommendation, do not promote to accelerated track. Another, Marcus Green, speech delay, above average STEM score. Recommendation, redirect to behavioral intervention. And then another, Aaliyah J. The rest of the name was scratched out, but the grade level beside it wasn't. 1st grade. Her vision blurred. She had been on this list from the beginning. Her mother rushed back to her when she saw the shock on her face. Aaliyah? What is it? What did you find? Mariah leaned in, eyes widening with horror, as she read the partially redacted name. They flagged you when you were 6 years old? Aaliyah nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She mouthed, they decided then, before I ever had a chance. Mariah clenched her fists, trembling with fury. They denied you before you even knew what you could be. Aaliyah swallowed hard, unable to respond. The truth was suffocating. All her life she thought she had simply been overlooked, but now she saw the architecture of a system designed to keep her in the margins. Every barrier she fought to push through wasn't accidental. It had been manufactured. She wiped her tears and clicked back into the folder. There had to be more. And there was. A final document blinked open. A memo fragment, mostly unreadable, but one line remained clear. We cannot allow these students to reshape the narrative. Their potential threatens the structure we rely on. Aaliyah leaned back, breath trembling. They feared her. They feared all the students who didn't fit the mold they wanted, the ones who could prove they were wrong about everything. The weight of all those erased dreams settled around her like a quiet storm. As she scrolled to the bottom of the folder, a new file appeared, one that hadn't been there moments earlier. Its title made her blood run cold. For Aaliyah's eyes only, urgent. The next morning, the halls of Jefferson High felt different, not because the fluorescent lights glowed brighter or the lockers clicked louder, but because the air itself seemed heavier with unspoken possibility. Aaliyah Johnson stepped through the doors wearing a plain white t-shirt she had scrawled with a single message in sharp black letters. Silence is not consent. The words were not rebellious slogans. They were a quiet demand. They were the only sound she would make today. She held her backpack strapped tightly, walking slowly enough that every footfall echoed slightly in the corridor. As she passed clusters of students, she saw heads turn. Some faces faltered. Some widened in recognition. Others stared blankly, unsure what she meant. But all eyes were drawn, not to gossip, not to mock, but to read. Some lips formed silent questions. Some brows furrowed. It was a ripple effect, subtle but real, like a pebble dropped in still water. No one shouted, no one laughed, and yet the shift was louder than any scream. In homeroom, Mr. Graves entered just minutes after Aaliyah sat. He paused, registering the shirt with something like confusion, maybe even irritation. The chalk he held trembled for a moment, before he set it aside. For the first time, his practiced composure cracked. He didn't call her out. He didn't issue a warning. He merely continued teaching, but the tone was altered. His words were clipped, teaching devoid of warmth. It was a silent admission. He could not march against a protest he could not hear. The students sensed it. The classroom energy felt taut, not with fear but with expectation. By mid-morning, rumors circulated that something was happening in the main hallway near the mural wall. The long blank expanse students had been asked to decorate with their own art during semester break. Aaliyah left quietly after class and walked toward it, curiosity tightening her chest. What she saw made it clear. Dozens of signatures scrawled in every color and style. Names, dates, messages ranged from "We see you" to "Truth belongs to the silenced." The wall glowed like a beacon, a tapestry of many students' voices, united silently. She recognized a few names, classmates she barely knew, students she'd seen recoiling from gossip and judgment. They weren't on her side before. But now, they had signed, without asking, without answering. Their signatures stood as if carved permanent, unflinching. Aaliyah ran her fingers lightly over the wall's surface, feeling the rough grain of marker against paint. She closed her eyes and exhaled slowly, the weight on her chest easing for the first time since the folder of buried records had revealed its truths. Across the hallway, Jasmine stood near the art room entrance, her gaze fixed on the wall. When she met Aaliyah's eyes, she nodded, soft, deliberate, then turned away. No words were exchanged, none were needed. The shared glance said enough. As the day progressed, the atmosphere shifted. Students walked slower, conversations quieted, phones came out, not to mock but to photograph the mural wall, to capture signatures, to share hashtags. Silence is not consent. See her dream started trending on school group chats within hours. The hallway pulsed with a strange energy, part solidarity, part anger, part revelation. It was a quiet protest, but its resonance was thunderous. In the final class of the day, Aaliyah sat near the window, sunlight slanting across her sketchbook. Her fingers itched to draw, but she resisted. Instead, she simply watched the room, the way students lingered in doorways, the way whispers rode the air like invisible currents. She realized that the protest wasn't just on the wall. It was in the pattern of how people moved now. Altered, unpredictable, uncomfortable, and that discomfort belonged, finally, to them, not her. When the final bell rang, the hallway erupted, not with noise, but with presence. Students filed out slowly, pausing at the mural wall. Some took photos, others just stared. Some traced fingers over names. Aaliyah hung back, shoulders tense, watching the ripples she had helped start unfold outward. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Near the end of the line, she passed classmates, some whispering quietly. Their glances different now. Curious, cautious, respectful. One girl pressed a folded piece of paper into Aaliyah's hand, without meeting her eyes. Aaliyah felt the paper's soft creases, the slight warmth of another's palm. She nodded, mutely, then stepped out the double doors into the golden dusk light. Home felt far more distant when she reached it. The ride long, the bus stop empty, the night settling quickly. She didn't rush inside. Instead, she sat on the curb, heart thrumming as she unfolded the paper. There was no signature, no traceable handwriting. The message was simple, 4 words inked in shaky script. If they won't listen, we will remember. Her chest tightened as she folded the note back carefully and slipped it into her bag. The words echoed in her mind louder than any shout. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet hope stirred, one that trembled, but refused to falter. She walked the last steps home under streetlights that flickered softly, witness lights casting long shadows across cracked pavement. As she reached her door, she realized something terrifying and beautiful at once. The protest had begun not with noise, not with chaos, but with her silence turned into statement. And now the silence around her would no longer protect the guilty. It would expose them. As she unlocks the door and steps inside, her phone vibrates with a new notification. A video file from an unknown contact titled "Watch Now." The screen glows. The file awaits. She opens it. The summons to the meeting came on a gray Wednesday afternoon. A slip of paper tucked into Aaliyah's locker, addressed to her mother, Mariah. No explanation beyond the word concern. By the time Mariah arrived at the school, the late winter air was cold enough to sting, but the chill in her gut had little to do with weather. Holding the folded note in one hand, she walked through the front lobby, where the TV mutedly broadcast local news. People passed without a glance, unaware of the storm gathering behind closed doors. She was guided down a narrow hallway to a small conference room. Beige walls, a rectangular table, chairs lined up against the wall. Inside waited 2 administrators, the assistant principal, stern-faced and well-dressed, and a counselor whose clipboard seemed more important than the person who carried it. At the center stood Mr. Graves, impeccably neat in his suit, tie tight, shoes polished, the ironed crease of his pants as sharp as his disdain. Mariah sat across from them, clutching her purse, the note still folded inside. Her heart hammered, not with fear but resolve. The assistant principal began in tones cold and official. "Mrs. Johnson, thank you for coming. We're concerned about your daughter's recent behavior. There have been complaints, no mention of childhood, no mention of hearing disability. No mention of the video that had surfaced, just complaints, vague, nameless, faceless. The word hung heavily in the air. The counselor slid forward a printout. Mariah saw it was labeled Behavioral Incident Summary. But the page was blank. No dates, no descriptions. She looked up, confusion and rising anger mingling in her eyes. She asked carefully, "What incident? What behavior are you referencing?" Her voice was calm, measured. She signed slowly to ensure comprehension before the administrator replied. "We have reports you were disruptive in class, overly expressive, and frankly, your presence makes some students uncomfortable." Mr. Graves spoke now, voice smooth but cold. Aaliyah's outbursts, her refusal to follow typical auditory instruction, and the constant demands for written transcripts, create strain on resources and disrupt the flow of teaching. For the sake of her peers, we think it might be better if she be placed in a different educational track. The words landed like blows. Mariah's chest tightened. Her jaw set. She stared at the printout, then at Mr. Graves, horror spelling itself in her mind. Disruptive? Outbursts? The same teacher who mocked her daughter's dream, now labeled persistence as defiance. She opened her mouth, ready to defend, to fight, to shout, but the administrator held up a slender finger. "One more thing," he said, voice almost professional. "Given the repeated feedback, we recommend a behavioral assessment. Until then, Aaliyah will be placed on temporary hold from advanced classes." Mariah's vision blurred. She clasped her hands to stop them from shaking. "You're punishing her for being deaf," she signed, words slow and precise. She leaned forward. "You recorded her failure. Someone filmed him mocking her. You yourself denied her when she raised her hand. And now you call that disruption?" Mr. Graves shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. The counselor gently tapped the printout, as though it was fragile glass. "Mrs. Johnson, we are trying to balance educational fairness for all students. This is not about punishment. It's about suitability." Mariah's eyes burned. She pushed forward a photo she'd printed from the viral clip, the still frame of Graves, leaning over Aaliyah, mouth twisted in contempt. Teacher's aides, cast in shadow behind him, looked away. "Is this suitability?" she asked, voice low but steady. The photo slid across the scarred table toward Graves. He didn't take it. He stared at it, lips thin, then looked away. The counselor consulted a file, fumbled for words. We will review this, but until the hearing, our decision stands." Mariah closed her eyes and exhaled slowly. The tension left her shoulders, but tightened in her guts. She gathered her purse, rose, and collected her coat. She didn't demand more. She didn't cry. She left. The notice for temporary hold, pinned to her daughter's record, already existed earlier than expected. She left with nothing but the weight of official silence and the knowledge that the gate had shut and locked. As they walked out of school together, Aaliyah stiff beside her mother, silent, pain flickering behind her eyes. The corridors hummed with normal after-school chaos. Lockers closing, bus riders rushing, announcements crackling through the PA. But nothing about the hallway felt normal anymore. It felt hollow, empty of truth, full of avoidance. They emerged into the cold afternoon, the sun cutting thin lines of light on the concrete. Aaliyah pulled her jacket tighter. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes darted past parked cars and wandering students, until her gaze settled on the mural wall they had signed just days ago. For a moment she froze. Then she shook her head slightly, refusing to look anymore. Mariah saw her pain, the silent grief of dreams deferred. She squeezed her daughter's hand. "We'll fight it," she signed in a trembling whisper. Somehow, Aaliyah nodded. Her silence returned, but it carried something new, determination sharpened by betrayal. As they walked toward their car, a piece of paper fluttered against the chain-link fence near the gate. A slow wind caught it, making it dance. A fragile flag in a quiet war. Aaliyah stopped. Mariah turned too. The paper settled, pinned against the metal by a small rock. Aaliyah picked it up. In neat bold letters someone had scrawled, "We see you, Aaliyah." There was no signature, no indication of who stood behind those words. Only solidarity. Only recognition. Mariah opened her mouth to speak, but closed it again. She saw Aaliyah's eyes, wide, alert, stunned. The two of them stood there, the wind tugging at their jackets, the school looming behind them like a courtroom they had exited, but not escaped. In the hush between heartbeats, that single message felt louder than any meeting. They slid into the car. The engine started. Soft. The heater hummed. Aaliyah stared out the window at the grid of fences, the empty parking lot, the fading afternoon light. Inside the car, Mariah exhaled soundlessly. She pulled Aaliyah's hand to her chest, letting the warmth travel. Aaliyah closed her eyes. Her hearing aids whispered with familiar static. For the first time since this all began, the silence felt different, full not of erasure, but of watchful intent. As they pull away, the note clutched in Aaliyah's hand. The simple message on the fence flutters in the rearview mirror. Behind them, two figures step from the shadows at the gate. Watching, one lifts a phone. The screen glows. They don't call out. They don't approach. They only wait. The evening settled over the Johnson apartment like a blanket stitched with unease. After the disastrous school meeting and the silent protest outside the gate, Aaliyah kept staring at the folded message in her hand. "We see you, Aaliyah." The words pulsed faintly in her mind, grounding her, yet stirring a deeper awareness that she and her mother were no longer battling something small or isolated. They had brushed against a larger truth, one that stretched far beyond a classroom, beyond a teacher, beyond even the principal's office, and that truth, she sensed, would not remain still. Mariah cooked dinner quietly, movements slow, weary, as though she carried the entire day inside her bones. She watched Aaliyah slide into her room, sketchbook tucked under her arm, laptop in hand. She didn't stop her. She knew her daughter needed space. Space to process, to unravel, to understand. She hoped that space wouldn't swallow her whole. Inside her room, Aaliyah placed the laptop on her desk, flicking on the small lamp that cast a soft halo of light across her drawings, pinned to the walls. She sat, tucked her legs under the chair, and opened the folder titled Records. They hit. A tremor crawled up her spine as she prepared to dig deeper, to uncover more pieces of the system that had once swallowed her name when she was only 6 years old. At first, the files loaded normally. She clicked through scanned reports, teacher evaluations, handwritten complaints from parents whose voices were ignored into oblivion. Each document felt like a heartbeat beneath her fingertips, a story someone tried desperately to hide, but which had survived in fragments. She reached a file she hadn't opened before, labeled Hearing Disability Assessment, Adjustments, 2009. Her finger hovered over the icon, breath steady. Then something strange happened. The file's name flickered. Once, twice. Then completely changed before her eyes. Hearing Disability Assessment Adjustments became Error File Reassigned. Her stomach tightened. She clicked again. A pop-up appeared. File not found. Aaliyah leaned forward, eyebrows knitting. She clicked another file. This one opened, but only partially. The scanned pages were jumbled, images distorted, words cut off mid-sentence. It looked as though someone were rewriting the document in real time, erasing chunks of truth before she could absorb them. A jolt of panic filled her chest. She tried opening the administrative correspondence folder. Half the icons inside were blank, as if their original content had been hollowed out. Her hearing aids hummed, louder than usual, not from malfunction, but from the quickening of her own pulse. She whispered to herself, "No, no, no," the words barely forming but echoing in her chest anyway. She clicked another file, the one with partially redacted names, the one that had nearly broken her earlier. Instead of opening, it blinked once, and dissolved into a blank gray square. Aaliyah's breath stuttered. Someone was deleting evidence. Not over weeks, not discreetly. Right now, while she watched. Her throat tightened. She sprang up, grabbed her phone from the nightstand, and plugged it into the laptop to copy whatever remained. The phone screen lit, then blinked. The battery icon showed red. She cursed silently, heart pounding, as she tried to hold the charging cable steady. The phone buzzed weakly, then died completely, black screen swallowing everything. Her chest tightened further. The quiet in the room thickened, suffocating. She twisted in her seat, eyes flicking toward the window. The street outside was strangely empty. No parked cars. No neighbors. No movement. The lamp post flickered on and off, casting long shadows that stretched unnaturally across the pavement. The silence outside wasn't normal. It felt deliberate. The lights inside her room flickered next, dimming then brightening, like a faltering heartbeat. Her hearing aids crackled faintly with interference. She froze, every muscle coiled tight. She turned back to the laptop. Another file vanished. Then another. Then another. "No," she whispered, reaching toward the screen as if her touch could stop the erasure. She opened a system folder, hoping maybe a cache remained, but the computer lagged, stalling with each click, running slower and slower until even the cursor jerked stiffly across the screen. She felt a coldness creep into her fingers, a numb dread that pulsed through her veins. She wasn't losing documents. She was losing history, the proof that she was never wrong, the evidence that hundreds of students before her had been pushed aside. Someone wanted those stories buried forever. Someone was watching. She slammed the laptop shut, not out of frustration, but out of instinct. Protect it. Do not let it erase itself completely. Her breathing came shallow and uneven. She stood abruptly, pacing the room, hands on her temples. The soft static in her hearing aids made her mind feel like it was buzzing with alarm. She looked around her room at the sketches on the walls, at the quietness she'd always considered refuge, and for the first time it didn't feel safe. It felt exposed. She reached for the window again, standing as close as she dared. The street outside remained unnervingly still. She pressed her palm to the cold glass. And then from somewhere far down the block, she felt the faintest vibration. Not sound. Vibration. Something she could sense in her bones more than hear. It rattled lightly through the glass before fading. She backed away quickly, pulse racing. The silence around her was no longer the comforting kind she lived inside every day. It was charged, loaded, watching. She sat back at her desk, swallowing hard. She opened the laptop again, hesitating as though the machine itself were alive. When the screen blinked back to life, the folder list looked shorter. Entire directories were gone. The files left inside were damaged, their thumbnails dimmed like ghosts fading from memory. Then, suddenly, her laptop dinged. Aaliyah flinched so sharply, her chair scraped against the floor. She stared at the screen, heart sprinting. A new email notification appeared. The sender anonymous, the same format as before, only now bolder, more threatening. From unknown. Subject last chance. The preview text made her blood run cold. You were warned. Her mouth parted, breath trembling. She stared at the screen, unsure whether to open it or shut everything down. But the email hovered there like a trap, waiting. The glow from the laptop cast a pale light across her wide eyes, making her look hauntingly still in the dim room. She could feel it now. The invisible tension in the air. The sense of someone pulling strings she could not see. Someone powerful. Someone afraid of what she might reveal. Her hands hovered over the trackpad, shaking. The email flashed again, this time with a second unexpected message beneath it. If you want the truth, come alone. Aaliyah's fingers hovered uncertainly above her phone screen as she typed the words, then held her breath as she pressed send. She wasn't sure if the message would be met with curiosity, disbelief, or rejection, but nothing good could come by staying silent. The chat group she created was modest at first. Just one name, then another. She titled it Voices Unheard. She sent a simple invitation. If you've been silenced, I want to hear your story. Without fanfare, without judgment, no demands, just permission to speak. Within hours, the first responses began to trickle in. A boy from another grade forwarded a letter he had written to the principal 3 years earlier, demanding accessibility and complaining of racial stereotyping. A girl from the hearing-impaired support class attached a video of a teacher mocking her accent. A third student, Latino, sent a photograph of a detention slip issued merely because he asked for class instructions to be written. Each message landed like a drop of acid on rusted metal. Painful, corrosive, necessary. Aaliyah felt the weight of each story press into her chest, but the pressure was not defeat. It was momentum. She spent the evening sorting testimonies into folders on her laptop. Denied gifted, behavior flagged, mocked in class, administrative silence. She labeled them carefully. She encrypted the files. She organized names, dates, places. It took hours, her hearing aids buzzing with static, her eyes burning from the screen's glow. Every story she read became a pulse in a hidden heart, one that refused to let injustice rest silently. Over the next day at school, Aaliyah moved quietly, scanning halls and classrooms. She noticed small glances, hesitant, uncertain, loaded with recognition. She tapped the sign-up link she had circulated. Join Voices Unheard. By the end of classes, 5 more names had joined. By the 4th day, the group had nearly a dozen deaf students. Students of color, kids who had dropped honors classes, kids threatened with behavioral reassignment, kids who'd been told they weren't cut out for advanced work. They arranged a first meeting after school in the seldom-used art room. The same room where Aaliyah once drew equations like secret prayers. The door closed behind them, quietly. Their table was a ragged circle of backpacks, notebooks, and phones. Some signed their names to a printed petition demanding transparency in student placement. Others taped evidence to the walls. Copies of altered referrals, misgraded tests, detention slips with coded reasons, redacted letters. The air crackled, not with accusation but with shared truth. Heavy, undeniable, binding. Mariah waited outside in her car while the meeting started. A silent guardian. Through the tinted glass she saw small movements of light under the door. The blur of teenage heads queuing and signing. She felt hope rise, cautious and trembling. She didn't know the full plan yet. She only knew that silence had shifted, and that this time it had a shape. As dusk fell, the group met again. This time they recorded their own testimonials. Soft signing captured on phones. Subtitles added by volunteers. Stories filmed from behind the lens. They refrained from shouting, from dramatics. Their power lay in calm, in clarity, in combined truth. They compiled files into a shared encrypted drive, coded it, backed it up. The name of the movement, Voices Unheard, began to feel like armor rather than label. One unexpected twist rose from the darkness. As they reviewed footage together, a new name appeared in the chat, one they didn't recognize. A silent number, no profile picture, no name. The message was a single link. Proof folder. Use it. Below it, don't share outside. The members looked around the table, uneasy, glancing at each other's faces. No one spoke. After a long pause, Aaliyah tapped the link. The folder opened. It contained audio recordings, not video, but unmistakable. Teachers' voices mocking students behind closed doors. Administrators discussing cleaning the roster, references to problem children, and keeping test stats pure. There were dozens of files. Each record was a bullet. Shock passed through the group. Then anger. Then silence, as heavy as guilt. The rug beneath the silence seemed to ripple with tension. Someone whispered, signed, "This changes everything." Others nodded. The plan was no longer just to expose, but to confront. They closed the meeting without hashtags, without public posts. They dispersed quietly, carrying phones, notebooks, burdened eyes. Outside, the school building loomed big and indifferent, unaware its halls had become archives of truth. Later that night, as the city drifted into quiet, Aaliyah reviewed the folder again. Her breathing slowed, her hands steady. She copied every file onto multiple drives. She encrypted and duplicated. She saved backups with invisible keys. It felt invasive and necessary, like preserving memory before someone tried to overwrite it. She slipped off her hearing aids and stared at the ceiling, letting the hum of quiet fill her ears. The weight of so many erased stories pressed down on her chest. But this time, it didn't crush. It strengthened. It forged. At midnight she heard a soft knock at the art room door. Her heart lurched. She wasn't sure who would come. A teacher? An administrator? A student with threats? Her breathing stuttered as she motioned for silence. The doorknob turned slowly. Light spilled in from the hallway. She rose, stance tense. A shadow edged inside. The door closed behind them, muffling the outside. Aaliyah raised her chin, silent readiness in her eyes. The figure stepped forward, but didn't speak. Instead, they placed a folded piece of paper gently on the dusty art desk. They didn't leave a name. They didn't walk away. They simply melted into darkness once more. Aaliyah bent and picked up the paper. On the chalkboard behind her, previously untouched in weeks, someone had scrawled in large, uneven letters, "We see you too." The message felt like thunder in a quiet sky, which meant they were not alone. As she opened the folded paper, her phone vibrated once. A new message in the movement chat. "Never stop." In the hush of the empty art room, the word echoed. Aaliyah glanced at the door. The doorknob rattled softly, but no one came, and on her laptop screen, a single file downloaded itself, labeled only Next Audio 2. She clicked. The first few seconds were silence. Then a distorted voice began to say a name she recognized, one she never expected. As dawn broke over the city, the first ripple appeared. A quiet article on the website of a small local news outlet under the headline "Student Accuses Teacher of Ableist Bullying." Video sparks outrage. The piece laid out the basic facts. A deaf black student, a teacher's mocking tone, a recording and complaints filed. Initially, it seemed like another local scandal, destined to fade. But within minutes, the link was shared across social media. Aaliyah's name, previously whispered only in school corridors, began to surface publicly. By mid-morning, Deaf Girl Speaks was trending among local teens. Comments poured in. Shock, empathy, disbelief. Some hit share reflexively before reading the article. Others rewrote the headline with added outrage. Silenced no more. A few left cruelty behind anonymity. Those comments bit with venom, probably lying for attention. Why didn't she raise her hand sooner? Parents sue for drama. The duality of support and hate carved new lines across the internet, spilling from Twitter threads to public posts on pages meant for sports games and bake sales. At school, the reactions shifted faster than nerves could settle. In the hallways, students clustered in small conspiratorial groups, some holding phones with the video's clip up, others whispering, glancing at Aaliyah with new eyes. Some offered silent nods, others averting their gaze. Teachers crossed glances, uncertain expressions hidden behind forced calm. The principal's office emptied faster than usual. Administrators hovered near doorways, murmuring quietly behind closed doors. The building, once a closed system of control and discipline, suddenly felt porous. By midday, regional reporters called. Cameras appeared parked in front of the school gates. Microphones with logos of news outlets loitered near the entrance, held by journalists who pretended to wait for shadow interviews. Aaliyah's mother, Mariah, stepped outside with her daughter when she saw one such face at the curb. The reporter raised her voice, camera buzzing. "Mariah Johnson, are you willing to speak about what happened to your daughter?" The question was pointed, insensitive, but Mariah nodded, took a deep breath, and signed slowly, firmly. "My daughter's voice is valid. So is her dignity." The sign translator echoed her words aloud for the microphone. Aaliyah watched from the car window, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and strange pride. Within 2 hours of that footage airing, the story exploded beyond the county. National education blogs picked it up, posting headlines like "Our Schools Silencing Deaf Black Students," and "When Silence is Treated as Mental Difference." Advocacy groups for disability rights and racial justice reposted, demanding investigation. Email inboxes overflowed with messages, some supportive offering legal advice or moral support, others hateful, demeaning, dismissive. The noise escalated. Aaliyah's living room, once a refuge, became an accidental war room, as mother and daughter read through each message, their stomachs tightening with each new wave of attention. The school board didn't wait for subpoenas. By afternoon, they released a brief public statement. "We are aware of circulating allegations. The district condemns discrimination and commits to reviewing classroom conduct under our code of ethics. We ask the public to respect student privacy as we proceed." On paper it was calm, professional, reassuring. In tone it was hollow, a veneer patina meant to buy time, to protect reputations, to contain chaos. Aaliyah and Mariah felt the weight behind those words, not apology, not empathy, just bureaucracy masking fear. Social media fractured. One side rallied behind Aaliyah, flooding posts with education equity and see her dreams. They shared stories of others like her, deaf students, black students, marginalized kids, whose voices had been ignored. The movement grew into a chorus, powerful, demanding. The other side dug in, claiming overreaction, false accusations, legal peril for teachers. Memes circulated mocking the idea of sign language math. Others painted the incident as cancel culture run wild. The public debate transcended race or disability. It became a referendum on who gets to belong, who gets to speak, who gets to rise. Late that evening, a national education correspondent reached out to Mariah and Aaliyah. On live television, calm, composed, authoritative, the anchor recounted the core of the story: a teacher's cruelty, a student's perseverance, a school's silence. Then came the twist no one saw coming. The anchor revealed that multiple former students had contacted the outlet within the past hour, claiming they had experienced similar discrimination under the same teacher or within the same district. Some named individuals. Others spoke anonymously. All spoke with trembling voices. The correspondent ended the segment. If this pattern holds, the issue is no longer about one classroom, it's systemic. As cameras pulled away from the Johnson home, and stories spread across cable networks, the school board called an emergency meeting behind closed doors. The corridors in the district building echoed with hurried footsteps, ringing phones, and the muffled turning of papers. Administrators exchanged looks, papers changed hands, threats and promises whispered under breath. The calm promise of review suddenly held the static tension of a man watching the floor collapse beneath him. Back in her room, Elia tried to sketch, but the pencil felt heavy, the page blank. She turned off the lamp, closed her sketchbook and stared at the ceiling. Her hearing aids hummed in low static, but the sounds outside, social media notifications, phone rings, reporter calls, had faded into a distant wave. What remained was quiet, deep, and trembling with implication. She realized the fight was no longer private. It had moved into living rooms, newsrooms, social apps, public squares. She had become a symbol, a name, a demand. Her mother knocked gently at the door before slipping in. "You did good," she signed softly. "You spoke when they tried to hush you." Aaliyah nodded. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence now held weight. It held testimony. Still, as the night deepened and the city lights blurred beyond her window, a lingering fear crept in. Aaliyah knew that once a story left your hands and entered the world, you lost a measure of control. Narratives shifted, voices twisted, truths distorted. The next morning could break you just as easily as bring justice. Yet somewhere in that fear, a fragile hope flickered. A belief that once the truth began to echo, maybe it couldn't be silenced again. On late-night television, the anchor's final words cracked open the next storm. Sources say the school district has launched an internal review, but whistleblowers warn records are already being destroyed. The district building looked lifeless that evening, its glass windows dimmed and tinted, as if the place had consciously withdrawn from public view. Inside, however, the halls were restless. Shoes clicked rapidly on tile, papers rustled. Low voices threaded through doorways, careful and hushed, weaving a tapestry of urgency and fear. Behind a set of heavy double doors, a secret hearing was underway, a meeting not announced, not documented on any public agenda, one meant to staunch the bleeding before the wound became irreversible. Inside, a long oval table stretched beneath fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. Board members filled their chairs with stiff backs and arms crossed protectively across their chests. At the head of the table sat Superintendent Keller, silver hair slicked neatly, posture rigid, expression carved into professional neutrality. But his clenched jaw betrayed the tension simmering beneath the polished exterior. He tapped a folder in front of him, its surface crisp, corners sharp, a folder that held the fate of Aaliyah Johnson within its pages. "Let's begin," he said, voice steady but tight. "This situation is accelerating faster than any of us projected. Media engagement, student unrest, community backlash. We must control the narrative before it spirals further." Murmurs rose around the table. One administrator spoke up, adjusting her glasses nervously. "What about the internal review? Reporters are asking if we've initiated interviews." "We'll say it's ongoing," Keller replied. "But we cannot allow the investigation to wander into areas that expose the district legally." Across the table, another member leaned forward, brow furrowed. "The files being destroyed. Is that confirmed?" A silence settled, heavy and telling. Keller cleared his throat. "We are preserving what is necessary for compliance." It was not an answer, and everyone in the room knew it. But no one challenged him directly. Self-preservation ran deeper than morality in rooms like this. A stack of papers was passed down the table. Each page bore a header titled Resolution and Compliance Agreement. The lawyer seated at Keller's left nodded, his voice smooth as polished marble. "This," he explained, "is a non-disclosure agreement designed to resolve the matter amicably. It compensates the family for distress, ensures no further legal escalation, and prevents additional exposure of internal documents. If the Johnsons sign, the district regains control." His next words dropped like stones. "They will be prohibited from speaking publicly, granting interviews, or participating in future inquiries." A hush deepened. Some nodded, relief floating across their features like thin veils. Others stared blankly at the papers, guilt flickering behind their eyes. "And what about the student?" a board member asked, a younger man with skeptical eyes and a restless pen tapping against the table. "The girl, Aaliyah." Keller folded his hands. "We offer a reassessment. It allows us to claim corrective action without admitting wrongdoing." "But under the same staff who mishandled her," someone whispered. Keller's lips tightened. "We cannot replace an entire faculty on the basis of one student's claim." The room stiffened, the familiar dance of power and pretense unfolding like a script performed too many times. A single dissenting voice cut through the quiet. "Ms. Rosalind Crane, a board member known for asking uncomfortable questions. She stared at the papers, her frown deepening. "And if the family refuses to sign?" she asked. The lawyer responded instantly. "Rehearsed. We remind them the school retains discretion over placement decisions. Without the agreement, we proceed with reassessment under standard protocol. If they resist, we mark the student's file as combative, which could impact her placement and future opportunities." Rosalind's eyes widened slightly. The threat was subtle, wrapped in policy speak, but unmistakable. Another board member raised her hand. "What about damage to public image? This story is already spreading." Keller leaned back. "Optics matter. That's why the NDA is essential. Silence from the family will help keep the others silent too." Whispers rose, some approving, others uneasy. A vote was called, pages shuffled, pens scratched. The tally was quick and crushing. The majority approved the plan. The folder containing the NDA, the very document meant to bury Aaliyah's voice, was stamped with an internal marker and placed back before Keller. Outside, the night pressed heavily against the windows, muffling the hum of a story being rewritten behind closed doors. As the meeting adjourned, chairs scraped lightly, relief exhaled, and the facade of control reassembled itself like armor. Members departed through separate exits, avoiding reporters, avoiding each other, avoiding their own reflections. But Rosalind stayed behind, staring at the empty chair where the lawyer had been moments before. Her heart pulsed with a quiet, painful clarity. She had watched the district bury too many truths already. This was different. This was deliberate, targeted, dismantling a child's chance at reclaiming her voice. She gathered her purse slowly, her eyes burning with a decision forming like a quiet storm inside her. Hours later, long after the building emptied and the echoes died, Rosalind stepped into the cold night. She walked to her car, opened the door and hesitated. The stack of NDA papers lay in her bag. She sat in silence, the keys in her lap, the streetlights casting fractured shadows inside the cabin. Then, breath trembling, she pulled out a blank envelope. She wrote a name carefully. Mariah Johnson. Her hands shook slightly as she slipped a single sheet inside, not the NDA itself, but something more dangerous. Her resignation letter. Attached at the bottom, in her looping handwriting, was a message. "I couldn't sign away their voices. Protect the story." She sealed the envelope, pressed it closed with resolve, and drove toward the Johnson apartment. Inside, Mariah was finishing dishes when she heard the soft tap at the door. She dried her hands, frowned, and opened it, only to find no one standing on the porch. Just an envelope, resting on the mat, lit faintly by the porch light. She bent, picked it up, and saw her name written across the front in a hand she did not recognize. Behind her, Aaliyah approached quietly, eyes curious, sensing the shift in her mother's posture. Mariah opened the envelope slowly, reading the letter with widening eyes. Her breath caught, her hand trembled. She pressed the letter to her chest as if absorbing its meaning more deeply. Aaliyah tapped her arm gently, signing. "What is it?" Mariah held up the final handwritten line, the plea, the warning, the declaration of defiance. Aaliyah's heart raced. Someone inside the system had broken ranks. Someone who chose truth over protection. In the dark hallway behind them, the air thickened with possibility, dangerous, unpredictable, radiant. Mariah unfolded a second page tucked behind the resignation letter. A page neither of them had noticed before. On it was a list of names, dates, and a heading that sent chills through both their bodies. Students flagged for reassignment, pending termination of records. The morning of graduation dawned pale and tentative, as if the world itself was holding its breath in quiet solidarity. For Aaliyah Johnson, the day felt surreal, her palms cold inside her dress pockets, the fabric of her gown loose around her shoulders, the cap perched atop braided hair, tassel swinging gently. She walked into the auditorium under a sky that threatened rain, but inside the building the air was already electric. Reporters stood near the entrance, microphones ready. Parents clutched cameras, phones, tissues, all poised to capture what many had thought impossible. In the back rows, Mariah sat tense, fingers white around the edge of her seat, reflecting both hope and fear. Every blink was measured, every breath heavy. She had watched her daughter lose so much. She had felt the weight of injustice, the sting of denial, the ache of witnessing dreams deferred. She didn't allow herself optimism. Not yet. But today felt different. Today held possibility. The ceremony began. Speeches stitched together years of work. Promises for the future. The weight of diploma covers lined in navy and gold. Students filed forward in neat rows. Caps tilted ceremoniously. When the time came for Aaliyah, the auditorium hush deepened, as though holding its breath again. Her name was called Aaliyah Marie Johnson. The hush cracked like glass. A hush full of expectation, of quiet electricity. She stepped onto the stage, each step echoing softly, gown brushing against the floor, tassel humming faintly in the light. The principal, the same institution that once denied her, extended the diploma. She accepted it, fingers gripping the edges. But instead of folding it quickly, instead of glancing sideways or lowering her gaze, she paused. She lifted her chin slightly, the silence wrapped around her like a cloak. Then, with deliberate calm, she pulled a placard from beneath the gown. She raised it high, hands steady, sign visible for every camera, every eye, every soul present. Black letters on white for every voice they tried to silence. Gasps rippled through the auditorium. Cameras popped. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised, tape recorders buzzing alive. Some parents stood, uncertain. Others wiped eyes. Teachers exchanged glances that contained regret, shock, shame. Aaliyah's chest rose and fell, but her face remained composed. Heartbreak and defiance indistinguishable behind a calm mask. Then, slowly, applause began. First a few scattered claps. Then a handful of cheers. Then a rising tide of voices. Students, faculty, families, drowning out the air itself with sound. Tears glowed under the stage lights. Whispers became cries of pride. "That's our sister," she showed them. Finally, Mariah rose, hands shaking, voice hollow but triumphant, as she mouthed, "I see you." Aaliyah did not look at her mother. She looked straight ahead, at the audience, at the flood of faces reflecting back determination, instead of dismissal. The moment stretched, fragile and loud, as if history paused to watch. After the cheering subsided, the ceremony ended with the closing benediction. Caps flew briefly into the air. Laughter and sobs mingled. Families embraced. Friends traded hugs and diplomas. Reporters hovered, seeking words, reactions. Camera flashes flickered like lightning over a waterline. Aaliyah walked down the aisle slowly, clutching her placard and diploma. Every footstep felt heavy, but not with fear, with truth, with ownership. She exited the stage, stepping into the light of a new dawn. Backstage, she leaned against a wall, letting silence settle around her. The din of celebration echoed distantly. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the adrenaline drain. She thought of every erased record, every erased student, every moment she'd been told she didn't belong. Today, being seen didn't mean being safe, but it meant being recognized. As she stood, her backpack still slung over her shoulder, a firm hand closed around hers. She looked down and saw no name tag, just a black USB drive, its casing unmarked. No note, no explanation. The hand slipped it into hers and left silently, swallowed by the crowd. The drive felt cold, heavy, loaded. In that moment, it didn't matter who left it. What mattered was what was inside, or might be. The weight of possibility, wrapped in caution. She looked up into the hallway, belts clicking, tassels swinging, laughter echoing, as if nothing had changed, as if the world hadn't just tilted. Then she stared down at the drive in her hand, heart drumming, mind rushing with questions. What did they want? Was it help, a warning, evidence, or danger? Mariah spotted the motion and was beside her in an instant, eyes wide. She didn't ask. She waited. She closed her fingers around Aaliyah's hand, steadying. Graduation had ended. But another door, darker, larger, heavier than any cap toss, had just opened. As Aaliyah slips the USB into her jacket pocket, the auditorium lights flicker, and across the stage, the giant screen meant for yearbook photos flashes briefly, then goes black. Then, in stark white letters, appear 3 words, "Not over yet." When Aaliyah slipped the unmarked USB drive from her jacket pocket that night, the weight of it felt heavier than her diploma. The hallway noise from the graduation celebration echoed faintly behind closed doors, but inside her room the air was thick with something else, possibility interlaced with dread. She placed the drive on her desk, unplugged her hearing aids, and stared at the screen's glow as though it might betray the secret it held before she had a chance to preview it. Her mother hovered outside the door, giving silent support, a guard against doubt, fear, and loneliness. She clicked the drive. Dozens of folders sprung to life, each labeled with neat headings: Student Placement Data 2005-225, Referral Denial Logs, Behavioral Flagging Records, Test Scores versus Placement Charts, Deaf Student Reports. The first file she opened was a spreadsheet, its rows extending far beyond what she could see. Thousands of entries, each row a student, each column a metric: test scores, behavioral ranking, placement status, race, hearing status, referral history. Her eyes traced the columns slowly. There it was. A pattern so stark she momentarily leaned back, disbelieving. Students marked as deaf or hearing impaired, who scored in the 90th percentile on mathematics or logic tests, yet were assigned remedial or behavior intervention tracks. Students of color, especially black students, repeatedly funneled into lower track placements despite equivalent or higher scores than peers in advanced classes. Notes in the margins, blacked out names, redacted comments, phrases like risk of dragging class average down, cultural compatibility concerns, resource allocation prioritization. The system that had hidden behind standardized policy was bleeding data, unmistakable, unforgiving. Aaliyah's throat tightened. She scrolled further, referral forms that had been denied, blank fields where teacher evaluations should have been, parents' requests marked as incomplete, lost, file not found. She opened a folder of test score comparisons, graphs, charts, bar lines, color-coded boxes. The trend was undeniable. It wasn't random error. It was intentional design. She leaned forward in the glow of the monitor, then closed her eyes, breathing through the shock. "Mom," she signed quietly, voice trembling. "Look at this." Mariah came in slowly, peered at the ribbons of data, and gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. "They erased hope," she murmured. "Not just from Aaliyah, from hundreds." Aaliyah reopened the drive and found audio files. Some were interviews with former students, recorded in hushed tones, voices shaky but alive. Testimonies of being redirected, undervalued, pushed into special classes for behavior rather than seen for brilliance. Others were internal memos, staff emails from earlier decades, discussing how certain groups of students lower test profiles or affect cohort performance, recommending placement adjustments, supplemental tracking, segregated classroom. One memo even dated back 15 years. Recommend placement review for hearing-impaired black students before next testing cycle. It felt like proof that someone had sat down and mapped out who to suppress, how to bury them, and how to frame the decision as policy compliant. She opened the last folder in the drive. Confidential district-wide review data. The files inside were thick, PDFs with multiple redactions, scanned letters, teacher evaluations, administrative meeting minutes. One letter stood out, addressed to the head of district assessment, dated just 1 month before Aaliyah's graduation. It said, "Be advised, any student with hearing impairment or ESLS must be flagged for placement review before awarding advanced placement, regardless of test result." The signature was smudged, but to Aaliyah it looked like deliberate anonymity. They expected this day to come. They planned for it. Her hands shook. She sat back from the screen, silent. The silence was loud. It felt like the weight of every erased dream, every lost opportunity, every silenced voice compressed into data and metadata, files and logs, evidence, cold, clinical, but real. She looked at her mother, tears brimming. Mariah wiped them away, gently. This could change everything," she signed. "They can't hide it now." Aaliyah nodded, eyes bright with emotion, not fear. She had expected vindication. She had not expected the magnitude, the systemic scale. This wasn't just about her. It was about thousands of children across decades. They didn't speak again. Words felt small. Instead, they sat together, the glow from the laptop bathing them in blue light, scanning, copying, backing up, every folder duplicated, every file forwarded securely to trusted members of Voices Unheard, emails queued, copies hidden. They worked with silent urgency, aware that at any second, the digital walls might close around them again. By 2:00 a.m., the work was done. The drive locked behind encryption. The original was safeguarded. Evidence dispersed across multiple repositories. Their message was ready. Aaliyah leaned back in her chair, hands trembling, body heavy with exhaustion and adrenaline. Outside, the city slept, but inside her chest, something had awakened. A fierce clarity. She realized this wasn't just about recovery of justice. It was about rewriting the rules. Her phone dinged unexpectedly. A message from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it, expecting threats, warnings, deletion demands. Instead, the message was simple. Well done. The files will air next week. Below it, a time and a channel. A whirlwind of fear and excitement washed over her. The system they exposed trembled now. The public square would judge. The school district, once arrogant behind locked doors, would have to answer. She rose, pushing away from the desk, chest tight with resolve. She pressed her palm to the cold window glass and looked out at the slumbering streetlights. Stars glinted faintly, unaware of the storm unfolding below. She closed her eyes, steadying herself. This wouldn't be easy. They would come for her. The backlash would hit hard. She had seen enough to know that silence can be deadly, but so can truth. In her mind, she whispered a vow. Silent but unbreakable. They tried to erase the past. Now the past would rewrite them. As she shuts down the laptop, the screen fades to black. But before it extinguishes completely, one final folder appears on the desktop, labeled only Phase 2 Complete Exposure. A cursor hovers over it. The week after the data drop felt surreal, like waking up after a storm and seeing how drastically the horizon had changed. Schools across the state, once silent guardians of conformity, began issuing statements. Public apologies, internal audits, transparent review committees. It started in whispers through district offices, but soon became headlines. State mandates, external audits of student placement policies, gifted track opportunities to reopen for displaced students. The walls fortified by years of secrecy began to crack. In Jefferson High, board members issued a package of reforms: discontinued behavioral tracking rubrics, mandatory external oversight, reinstatement offers to students who'd been demoted or rerouted, and retroactive evaluation for advanced classes. The announcement came with a promise: redress, transparency, accountability. The official tone was cold and controlled, but under it ran the undercurrent of fear. For Aaliyah Johnson, the change felt personal. She was no longer just a student fighting for herself. She had become the symbol of thousands, deaf, black, marginalized students, whose stories had been silenced. As she walked the halls now, she didn't pass unnoticed. Students offered polite nods, some whispered thank you, others avoided eye contact, uncertain whether to celebrate or to distance themselves from the storm. Teachers no longer circled her with condescending sings. Many avoided her entirely. The air crackled with guilt and avoidance, but also with the weight of accountability. Outside the academic corridors, the movement she helped revive gathered momentum. Voices unheard turned from secret chat group to a network of dozens of families. Parents who wanted justice, students who demanded recognition, former graduates who had been pushed out quietly over the years. They held meetings online, shared stories, not just from Jefferson, but from districts across the state. Data from the leaked drive became templates. Templates transformed into petitions. Petitions led to law firms offering pro bono counsel, civil rights organizations mobilizing, local media returning for follow-ups. The rhetoric changed. This was no longer a single case. It was a pattern. It was systemic. In the weeks that followed, a state education board convened a public hearing, the first of its kind to address placement bias and educational redlining. Aaliyah, now 16 but still walking the halls of a school she planned to graduate from, sat in the back row, dossier in hand. Families filled the room, some in wheelchairs, some with hearing aids, some holding children barely old enough to read. When witnesses spoke, tears traced silent paths down cheeks. Sign language interpreters moved arms slowly. Voices cracked, and then found their strength again. The room vibrated with stories long buried: lost scholarships, suppressed grades, misdiagnoses, systemic humiliation. When it was her turn, Aaliyah stood under the harsh fluorescent glare, drew a deep breath, and signed, "I was told to be silent. I wasn't, and I won't let any child be mute for fear." The room erupted, not in applause, but in reverent, shaken silence. Then support, then chants of her name, then change. Her story spread. National newspapers covered the hearings. Radio shows interviewed parents. Civil rights organizations launched campaigns, dubbed Equal Access Now. Districts across several states proactively scrubbed behavioral rubrics, opened old records for review, extended offers of retroactive credit and opportunity, Class action suits were filed, settlements negotiated, policies rewritten. The system, long considered immovable, began to stir under pressure, the foundations shifting. Aaliyah's life transformed. She became a symbol, not through loud battle cries, but through proof, persistence, and the unshakable calm of someone who refused to be erased. She began receiving invitations, panels, educational conferences, awareness campaigns. She declined offers that came with glamour or personal comfort, full-ride scholarships, media tours, spotlight interviews. She chose instead to focus on building something lasting, a nonprofit support network for deaf and marginalized students, tutors, legal advice lines, scholarship funds. She named it Silent Voices, Open Doors. Its tagline, "When silence isn't consent." Through it all, she held the memory of every erased name she found in those files, every child whose potential was buried. When she looked into classrooms now, she no longer saw empty seats. She saw possibility. She met young students' eyes with steady reassurance. She signed encouragement, guidance, permission. She became living proof that change could start with one voice and ripple into many. At Jefferson High, the old whiteboard policies were torn down. Walls repainted, new murals went up, vibrant, chaotic, alive. On one wall, a mural artist painted a portrait of Aaliyah, headphones in, eyes bright, tassel swinging, placard in hand, under it a caption, "Here we hear." Students touched the paint softly when they passed. Some added their names, some drew hands reaching out, some left empty spaces, for those who couldn't stay. But as dawn settles, shadows remain where walls are new. Old minds linger. Resistance simmers in closed offices, in district backrooms, in whisper networks that fear exposure more than failure. For every apology issued in public, a private memo lingers. For every reinstatement offered, another child remains displaced. The change has begun, but the fight is far from over. One evening, weeks later, Aaliyah walked into a new classroom. Not the old math room, but a special advanced placement lab, built under the Reform Initiative. Fresh paint, new desks, windows open to afternoon light. A new banner hung across the wall, Equity and Access Lab. Parents, students, volunteers gathered quietly. She smiled softly, eyes shining with cautious hope. As she set her bag down and turned to watch the first group of students file in, her phone vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out without hesitation. A single notification appeared. This was only the beginning. Her heart clenched. She looked up at the freshly painted walls, the banner fluttering faintly in the air, the hopeful faces of students waiting for class. The future felt fragile but alive. And somewhere in the hush before the next wave, she heard the echo of voices rising. The banner's fabric rustles softly, then tears slightly at one corner, as though warning her that new walls may hold new secrets. If Aaliyah's story moved you, don't let it stop here. Type yes in the comments if you believe every child deserves to be heard, no matter their voice. What would you do if your silence was used against you? Subscribe for more stories that challenge systems and uplift the unheard, because real change begins when we refuse to look away.